Good evening to everyone. I would say also good morning and good afternoon to those who are watching us around the world. I would not say good afternoon, but at least say good morning safely. This is Abhivardhan from Indistinct, and here we are with a very interesting episode of Indistinct episode season one, I would say. Of course, this is the last panel of the Indo-Pacific Mobility Forum 2021, and tonight we will be discussing about Indic languages in the information age. That's a simple title. And I would like to refer two discussions that we had in the past, and that's why we have Anurag with us as well. We had discussions on the role of Sanskrit, Farsi, and Urdu on 15th August with Dr. Balram Shukla, following which we had a discussion on the occasion of Hindi Divas with Kushagra, Niket, Anurag, and Dr. Balram Shukla, again on Hindi and Sanskrit and Indic languages. And from there, a debate started on Twitter, not related to the discussion which I had with Dr. Balram Shukla, but to some extent on education. And there were many debates happening. Uh, but we are not discussing the debate itself, but we are discussing the main aspect of it. So, what happened essentially was that many people were questioning the relevance of native languages in India. They were saying, people get jobs through English. Why do we need native language in India? You know what? People are getting jobs, you know what, let them learn in English, and so forth. And I know that there is a lot of language politics going on as always, but we are not going to discuss the politics of it because there is no need to do so. There is no scientific reason, there is no policy reason to do so, because that is more related to regionalism and not related to real policy issues. But I saw some very interesting Twitter threads, and I can't share right now, which were related to our relationship with the Anglosphere when it comes to languages. So, interestingly, native languages have a lot to do with cultural intelligence in the way we see things, the way we learn, adapt, and also create new ideas, as well as preserve the old ideas and evolve around it. We can do revolution, we can do evolution, both of them, and how we do it is something which is based on our language. I always say this whenever I talk about my own relationship with English as a language. It's of course a colonial language, but whenever I say I love English in the sense of what I do as a poet, it's because that I love Hindi a lot, and that has a lot to do with my own native language. I write poems in Hindi, and that inspired me to use English in the way I wish. So, and in fact, ironically, even the way English is used around the world is not the same. I'm not talking about the accent and the English India versus English American and English British. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the way we use the vocabulary. So sometimes I'll say, okay. Sometimes somebody in an ex country would say something which is more like an American jargon. You use these words a direct sense, which is very small, but you might use indirect words of solemn nature, which are very respectful and gracious. So that is your cultural connection. That is your individual feature as well, and that's something which is very interesting. So here we have a very interesting discussion, and let me introduce the panelists one by one fast, so that we can jump on the discussion, and I give a brief insight, and so that we can ask Anurag to begin. So we have Kiran Varanasi, Vakifs, and yeah, after a long time, he was featured in our discussion on India as a civilization state with Richard and others. So if you have watched the discussion, congratulations, you have gone so far and supported us. We also have Chetan Anand at the rate Stello_Varda. You can find him on Twitter. Very insightful person, very cheerful, very nice person. Discusses about languages and their relevance, especially Punjabi, Hindi, and so on. We have Kushik Raghavan. Here, Kushik is also available. I think Saraswat KNK on Twitter. He also discusses about Indic issues, the scientific aspects, Indic languages, and so on. We also have Anurag, over dear Anurag. We all know Anurag and his interest in issues of anthropology and of Indic importance. And we have Amey Velinkar. He's a research enthusiast in artificial intelligence ethics. And we have the party. Let's begin the party. So on a much reasonable note to say. So as this discussion begins, I'll make a simple brief and then I'll pass it on to Anurag to explain about the role of languages so that we can start the discussion around. And yes, those who have sent us questions through Wakibs or through me, I will be very happy to deal with them, but we will deal with them once all the main pointers have been discussed. And of course, if there are any important pointers which will be discussed, uh, we will definitely deal with them. So that is something which is the main case. So as I said, the language debate is going on all the time, and some people say let the parents decide. Some people say this is the problem, that the problem. But cultural intelligence is something which ranges from societies to individuals, and sometimes even state actors. And we often ignore the role of languages because many people find it very convenient that, you know what, the Anglosphere has given us English, we have neoliberalism, we have globalization. It's a perfect combination, so done. But larger problems do not end. And the thing with this is that overgeneralization of things makes us not understand what are the real issues. So in the episode 14th I had with Ruchir, I had discussed about Germany, the Visegrad Group, and Europe, and ironically, I had discussed about, how Merkel leadership was responsible in affecting the way Eastern Europe's value was, and why it was important because, sucking up talent and all of those issues, which was of course affecting the Eastern Europe in any ways. But that was important because when it comes to equitable representation and respect of diversity, I think a larger question looms in as to why native languages and nativity is important at the first place. And that's why Indus Thing came in as a podcast. We do not just discuss issues just because we have to make a narrative. We don't make, we criticize and we judge the narrative. So that's what we do. Since episode 1, we have been doing this. If somebody says, okay, why India is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, then why or why not? If somebody says decoloniality is what, then we say why or why not. So that's what Interesting has been doing, and we will always commit to do so. So, Anurag, you were there in the last discussion with Dr. Balram Shukla, and we were discussing about the colonizing tendency of Hindi as a Rashtra Bhasha, as people say. It's not a
Yes,
Rashtra Bhasha
yes,
yet, but it's one of the official languages in the Indian Constitution. So, in 3 minutes, if in brief you can explain what does it actually mean with Hindi and Indic languages, as an insight of what we have discussed last time, and what should we deliver much in the discussion. So Anurag will give the insight. I'll be in the backseat
yeah,
for a little while.
yeah. So whenever we discuss these issues of languages, we generally discuss languages in terms of language as a communicative mean to convey something. But when it comes to defining languages in a broader term, then I would like to define languages as not as merely as communicative tool, but as a carrier of culture or bearer of culture, and particularly and how through these languages this entire body of values travel from one generation to another generation, and to cut off this access, like if I'm my native language is something else and I have been put into English medium school, so I have been cut off from that source, that link through which I could have accessed my past, my values, my culture. So that's where I kind of tend to locate language debate here. And even in our last debate, we were discussing that how the colonizing tendencies in Hindi. For example, so my mother tongue is Awadhi, and many of my friends they speak Bhojpuri, and there are other local languages in Uttar Pradesh itself, and in Bihar now there's this debate of Mithila versus Hindi. So how now Hindi as a language has taken over all of these languages. So in schools, in a schooling system, you tend to read only text which has been written in Hindi, and also so there are these civilizational tendencies also. So Hindi has also become a language of market, and also when you speak to others, you generally speak in this khari boli, in Hindi tongue, not in Bhojpuri or in Awadhi, and that makes a hell lot of difference because then you're speaking from a place where you feel that your language is not appropriate. Like if I speak in Awadhi, people might judge me that, oh, he's a rustic or he comes from some village. So those tendencies, even in Hindi, we can see that, and these tendencies Hindi as a language has borrowed from English, and that's what I'm now going to discuss. And for example, so I'm going to take three writers here, like three philosophers, writers, or freedom fighters here, who kind of talked about the role of languages in sustaining this colonial consciousness in among all of us. For example, Gandhi, he talks about, so Gandhi, even though he stayed in UK for so long, he decided to write his books. Like he wrote two of his books, like his original books, Hindu Swaraj and My Experiment with Truth. And both of these texts were written in Gujarati, in spite of the fact that Gandhi was English educated, and it clearly indicates that Gandhi at that moment he stood for Gujarati language. And in that book itself, Gandhi discusses that how like learning in English. For example, he gives an example of from his own life. So I'll just read out this passage. So he says that I do, yeah. So and let me confess to the reader that in spite of all love for the mother tongue, I do not to this day know the Gujarati equivalents of technical terms of geometry, algebra, and the like. I know now that what I look 4 years to learn of arithmetic, geometry, algebra, chemistry, and astronomy, I should have learned easily in 1 year if I had not to learn them through English but Gujarati. My grasp of these subjects would have been easier and clearer. So here Gandhi is like very clearly putting it out that how the language, the medium of language actually impacted his consciousness and his ability to access his own knowledge. And similarly, if we take another Indian scholar, for example, Anand Kumar Swami, he talks about a single generation of English education suffices to break the threads of tradition and to create a nondescript and superficial being deprived of all roots, a sort of intellectual pariah who does not belong to the east or west, the past or future. So Anand Kumaraswamy, he came from the traditional, so he offered more of a traditional view of language debates in India. And then we also have some scholars like, for example, V.S. Naipaul. He talked about how through this language of English, the Indian minds were colonized, and the backwardness of Indian minds and the condition of India could be explained through how Indian felt very happy when they met some Englishmen or they when they speak English. So and all of these tendencies now we can see in Hindi when we discuss Hindi in terms of other local regional languages. So from this backdrop, my question to like all of you is that how, for example, I was discussing with Hardhan, for example, in AI, when we discuss AI, artificial intelligence, even that is, it has some background in some theory of mind, like some theory of conception of mind, how mind functions and how mind works. But if we take this theory to Indian context, then we have several terms for it. For example, we use term like manasa, chitta, buddhi, right? So these two are completely two life word, different life word. And what we have been doing till now is that just borrowing that conception of mind to Indian context. But if we kind of try to look at it from Indian perspective, then we may have to change several things in this whole conception. So more of a epistemological restructuring of how in information age languages has been looked at and should be looked at. So maybe from this backdrop, we can now like discuss how languages can, especially Indic languages, can be brought into this discourse of AI debates or information.
So, with that, I would request Amey, Kushik, Chetan, and Kiran to give their experiences on multilingualism. So, I was discussing, and I realized that maybe uh, Kiran suggested that we should have a talk on this, and it's very important that uh, how multilingualism has been experienced, because it's a very interesting phenomenon altogether, and how other languages are currently thriving in the current year. So I think let's begin with Kiran, then let's go to Ameya, then let's go to Chetan, and then let's go to Kushik. So I think once some elaboration happens, I think we'll get some matter to understand, and then I'll go to the first ever point of this discussion. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction and the nice contextualization, Anurag. Yes, language, a lot of people just think it is a sterile medium of communication.
Yes, yes,
Language itself doesn't hold any value. Value comes from what we express in the language, what ideas or what we think. But actually, language is a constraining factor for our thinking, and which language we use to express actually prompts in our mind and in our consciousness different types of ideas. So,
yes,
for example, if I speak in Telugu, the kind of things that I think about would be very different from what happens when I speak in English, or I speak also French and German. So, these languages have a subtle conscious effect. So this we know in India because we have a very long tradition of cognitive science and linguistics in India. And we have, for example, Bhartrhari,
yes,
he actually formulated all this and said that language actually opens up a conscious experience, and that happens in a stream. So the way we speak, each phoneme, each sound opens a new conscious experience. That's a sphota. And we understood that in India, but we kind of forgot about it in this modern world, and we think simply that language is sterile and it doesn't matter which language you use. It's actually completely wrong. And the way to figure that out is actually if you speak multiple languages. So a lot of us are multilingual in different contexts and different range of expression. So for example, when we speak at home with our parents or with friends, we typically use the local language, so it creates a kind of a bubble of consciousness. And when we are at work, depending on what language we are forced to in our work, it would be a different conscious experience. And when we travel abroad, that would be different. So people actually compartmentalize these things and put them separately. So
yes,
that kind of multilingualism is fine. We do that a lot in India. But I actually experienced a different type of multilingualism when I came abroad, specifically to Europe for my studies. And there I realized actually that education and scientific research and culture and all these aspects, which are high culture, exist in their native languages up to the highest level. So, not just professional education, graduate studies, doctoral studies, everything exists at the high culture in their native languages. So, what typically happens in such a scenario? So, I was in France, I did my doctoral studies in France. These people who are researchers in France, right? They are truly multilingual because
yes,
since they work in research, they have to publish abroad, like they have to publish in international languages, typically English. So they're quite fluent in English, but at the same time, they're able to express everything also in French. And a lot of people who came to France to do research, in my colleague, the people I knew, they came from, for example, Russia or from Italy, from Romania. They did most often they would have done their professional education, which is computer science or mathematics or whatever. They would be doing that in their native language, so they are fluent in that native language, whether that be Russian or Italian or whatever. Then they came to France, and they typically are not that fluent in English. So very quickly it happens that they are more fluent in French than in English after a couple of years. So they will be very fluent in French. So the professional discussions would also happen in French. Typically they might happen in English, and there are many people who don't have the French background, but they also happen in French. So they're fluent in French as well with respect to the scientific terminology. And naturally, since they publish also in international venues, they also know the English terms. So that I would call true multilingualism, which I saw that only when I came abroad and realized that actually the terminology exists in all these languages, and the way the terminology is defined kind of spurs the mind in a different way. And that is
yes,
for research, it's true for culture, it's true for philosophy, politics. So all these discussions happen in a very thriving environment, and there would be books, literature available all over the place. So if you go abroad in Europe, if you go to a bookstore, you would see all the books published in the native language. So in French, for example, in France, or in German in Germany. A lot of foreign literature would be translated into French or in German. There would be also a section of foreign language books, including English, but also French or Italian or other languages. And what we have in India is actually a kind of a monolingualism for the high culture. It exists only in English. The bookstores carry books only in English. Very, very rarely you find literature these days. It's really unfortunate. It used to be a bit different a couple of decades ago, but now the high culture exists exclusively in English, and people who are educated or elite are able to express only in English. So, for example, if I have a professional discussion in computer science with my colleagues in India, they would be fumbling for words in their own native languages because they just don't know. And Anurag gave a very great example from Gandhi. He had the same problem. He couldn't express arithmetic or astronomy in Gujarati. And why is that? Why is that Europe has this true multilingualism, what I call true multilingualism, and why India has this kind of boxing of languages, and each box is good for something but not for everything. And typically the box which is the least useful would be discarded, right? So when you travel within Uttar Pradesh, you move from your eastern area and you move to the west, you just discard Awadhi. It's very unfortunate. People forget their own native tongue. And if you travel within India, so from Uttar Pradesh, you come to Bangalore, for example, you just discard the Hindi bucket and you start speaking in English. And it is this type of monoculturalization is happening in India, especially in a group context when multiple regions come together. And sometimes when people from different cultures marry with each other in their joint family, it typically happens, especially in the elite, it just happens that English is the language of the family. So this is happening, and it is happening at a very accelerated pace, and a lot of our people are just not aware of the threat, the speed at which this is happening, and how quickly it can just happen that nobody speaks Indian languages anymore. And since I have been living abroad for the last 15 years, so to speak, every time I go to India, there is actually a change in how Indians express. So their facility with native languages is really dwindling. And this is, in my opinion, because we don't actually have multilingualism in India. So we have a kind of a mirage that we speak multiple languages, but not at the same level of fluency. Definitely not like how I saw in Europe. So I thought it would be a good topic because we have other people in the panel who have also been living abroad. So to give their experiences, how they experienced multilingualism, and then we can probably move on to the information era and the Indic languages and so on. Yeah. So I just give one example of what I experienced in France or in Germany. So you have, let's say, a TV program, right? A TV program on gardening. So I just watched some TV program recently, and there was a gardener, was French guy, a landscape architect, who was going to different countries and presenting the gardens there, like from Italy, from United States, and so on, right? So he goes there and he would interview the local person. And this whole program was filmed in France, so the person would be speaking French. But when he's interviewing, so he goes to Italy, let's say, and he's interviewing that person, he speaks in French, right? And then that person would be speaking in Italian, and it would be dubbed in French, right? So the other person sometimes might know French, but they would not typically know. So what happens behind the scenes is that there would be an interpreter who would be like maybe not on the camera, but would be just translating this thing into Italian or Russian or whatever, and the other person would be speaking, and this will be dubbed much later. But what is interesting is that this person who is the narrator, who would be speaking in French because that is meant for the French audience, even when he is interviewing a foreign person, right? And its whole thing would be dubbed. And I saw that in Arte. Arte is like a European channel, which would be dubbing everything into German anyway. So you have the same content available in French or in German. So this would not happen in India. So let's say an anchor, some program goes from UP to Andhra Pradesh, let's say, and interviewing the local person, they would not speak in Hindi. It would be very typically, they would be speaking in English. And English is being used as a kind of a monocultural imposition because we just don't have the awareness that multilingualism can exist, right? People can be multilingual. People can actually, speak in multiple languages. So this I will just stop my point here, and I would ask the other people on the panel to give their experiences and what they think about multilingualism and the role of other languages, what they know. Yeah.
Yes, Amay, you can go ahead. I
You,
think you can unmute yourself. Yeah.
Hi. So first of all, namaste to all, and thanks for inviting me to this panel. I think it will be a very interesting discussion today. So actually, I think Anurag and Kiran have started off very well, and I agree with many of the points here. For instance, Anurag mentioned that language is often viewed in today's culture as just a mode of communication, a common medium to express something that you have. But in fact, it is more than that, right? It embodies a certain culture, a certain context, a history, and when we get more disconnected from that, that does actually have impacts on our education. And one of the things I hope we can discuss later is some of the educational impacts that are brought about by mother tongue education versus education in a foreign tongue, because I think this is very relevant to India, and there's a lot of science around it, but sometimes ideology comes in the way. Yeah, so like Kiran, actually, I also spent a lot of time in Europe. So I recently moved back to the US, but before that, I was in Swiss academia. So I was in the French-speaking part of Switzerland. And it's a very interesting country, I thought, because it is actually truly a multilingual country. You have 4 national languages, basically German, French, Italian, and Romansh, which is spoken by very few. They usually tend to speak one of the other 3 languages. But basically, this is a truly multicultural society, and you have a country that is divided into different cantons. So each canton will have its own language. There are a few cantons which are multilingual. So it was kind of interesting to see, on the one hand, how they retain their local culture and linguistic culture of that canton, but at the same time, how do they maintain a level of national cohesion, right? And I think there are definitely a lot of lessons that India can draw upon from Switzerland, because again, I think India is similar in terms of linguistic diversity, but maybe multiplied by 10. So yeah, and then I think in the educational sphere also there are some lessons to be learned in terms of mother tongue education, and how to deal with this kind of cross pollination. When people of different cantons and different languages interact, what language should be used at the university and such. Um, so yeah, I was basically a researcher there for a couple of years, and yeah, I think my observations were very similar to what Kiran mentioned. There was, I would say, true multilingualism, where people can actually think to a very high level in their language, right? So you might have, the local language in the region I stayed was French, but you had many Italians, many German-speaking people, and they could interact in multiple languages, and you could see that they were a bit more comfortable in their mother tongue. Often when I taught a class, or held some kind of recitation, there were times I would switch to French, as I am fluent in French, and that would actually help some of the students, but they were clearly also fluent in English. And yeah, I think one of the things that I wanted to point out is that, yeah, it is interesting that, when it comes to technical education and books, they have everything translated to their own language. And, people are able to think about very higher educational things in their own language, which is something that is becoming less and less the case in India. Actually, the point that you mentioned, Kiran, about the dubbing, I would also mention that in India, you would often have programs where, okay, this is ostensibly a Hindi channel, but then someone comes in and speaks English, and somehow often it is not dubbed, and you're expected to just kind of know 2 or 3 different languages, right? This is not the case in Switzerland. In fact, I remember this one incident where the Radio Suisse, or basically the Swiss National Broadcasting Service, they brought in someone from the German-speaking part, and they had someone from the French-speaking part, and they could somewhat discuss um, in each other's language, but they actually resorted to English for something, and this was considered a big like blasphemy, basically. So that generally tells you about how much they value the language. But I think the one other thing that I want to note is that a lot of the questions that we deal with in India about link language, what should the language be at the national level versus, say, your education, or what should happen at the local level. These are questions that people in Switzerland are also grappling with, right? Basically, it used to be the case that all cantons, you would learn the local language, and then the next language that you learn is basically one of the other Swiss languages. And nowadays, there's a push by some cantons to say, if we're in the French-speaking canton, why do we care about German? We should learn English. That's the global language. And then others say, no, this hurts national cohesion. So I think there are some lessons to be drawn upon here. But the one thing to note is that regardless of this question of additional foreign languages, education is always in the mother tongue, primarily, except maybe the international people who live there who send their kids to international schools. So I think that's also something that I hope will spark more discussion about education policy and pertaining to an Indic context. And then just a final point, right? So in academia, I've also noticed there's a major difference between, say, Indians and a lot of the Europeans in terms of this contextualization that Kiran was referring to, where one language is, at least in India, one language is considered the language of home. In professional sphere, it's somewhat considered awkward to not use English or something. I've experienced this too. Where there's a couple of Indians in the room, and we're discussing research, and somehow we all speak the same language, Hindi or whatever it may be, but somehow we're imposing English on ourselves, and maybe we don't always know the terminology. So I think this is actually one of the things that got me thinking more about these questions of language. But on the other hand, with Europeans and people in other parts of the world, you don't see this, right? I actually am in an academic area where there's a lot of Israelis, right? And they generally when they're working amongst themselves, they're discussing research in Hebrew, and they're generally educated in that language as well. It is only when someone else comes in the room to discuss research who does not speak that language that they switch to English, and they're usually quite fluent as well. So I think I'll leave it at that for now. And I'd invite some of the other people to share their experiences as well.
Thanks, Kiran Varanasi and Amay Walinga. I believe you set the bar really high. Okay, my experiences with multilingualism have been extremely positive, because my initial education, in fact, until the 10th standard, was in a school where the medium of instruction was Punjabi, and Hindi and English were merely 2 subjects. and no one really bothered if you did good at them, because they were merely 2 subjects out of, I don't even remember, 6 or 7. And but learning, my initial education was in Punjabi, and most of the magazines that I read as a child, they were primarily religious magazines from the Gurdwara, and it was a whole world. But then I started reading in Hindi. We subscribed to a Hindi newspaper because for some reason in Punjab, Hindi is also a prestige language. I don't. uh, I believe because yeah, and that changed my again whole outlook on the world. Oh, so there is a world beyond my state. that, that, that was the first reaction. And I remember asking my teacher after watching Sholay, how's it possible? In our villages, people speak Punjabi, but in Sholay, in a village, that's also a village, people speak Hindi. I don't really understand. How's that possible? No wonder she. I don't remember what she said, about how she answered, but what I'm trying to get at is that Hindi expanded my world. I just realized, oh, so there is Gujarat, there is UP and Maharashtra, a whole lot world to explore. And my great grandmother, because uh, she migrated from again Pakistan, which was back then British India after the partition. She read Urdu newspapers, and um, when I started reading Urdu, oh God, so there's poetry and much more. The only big break was after the 10th standard, when suddenly the medium of instruction being it switched to English. It took maybe 4 years to complete a 2-year course plus two, but but still, I'm thankful because through English I realized, oh, there is a whole world outside India. There's Europe. You can read Duma. Then there China, Japan, whole, and that's been my experience. Each language opens up a new world, and th- 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 and I think Kiran talked about true multilingualism. I believe it exists in some states of India. For instance, in Gujarat, you will find many people who speak Hindi on top of their native Gujarati. Prime ministers, again, a prominent example. In Punjab, that's also because I think that's the case with Maharashtra as well. Because they have already, at least in these places, Hindi is already a link language, functions as a link language. And what I wanted to say is, yeah, true multilingualism, yeah, does exist, but generally we are still living in the Middle Ages. Back when in Japan, China, and Korea, everyone spoke their local language or dialect, but everyone wrote in literary Chinese, one yan one. Or in Europe, where people spoke maybe Middle French or Middle Spanish or Middle Portuguese, but they always wrote in Latin. Or in India, where people wrote in either in Sanskrit or in Persian. And today we have merely switched the languages. We haven't really modernized, where a dialect or maybe a popularly spoken language can be used for business or for education or studies. So that's from my side.
Kushik, would you like to go ahead now? Yeah.
Hello, yeah. Thank you and nice to join in this chat. I think it's a very relevant thing because in India we kind of have sidestepped the whole issue that for many years that people haven't even bothered about the language of education. It's more or less accepted that we'll only use English. So, but I think the more people experience the world, go around and just not the Anglosphere, I think there are many things that will come to the fore that is like, you know, because we are the only one yet the completely kind of nonsensical way in a sense, because there are much more tougher countries, like very small countries with many more languages, but they keep this diversity of languages intact actually. So, where I did my master's in Germany, and as well as subsequently I worked in and around Germany.
mainly in Luxembourg and Switzerland. In these countries, of course, you have most people speaking German, and in Switzerland, this unique case of Swiss German, which is actually not one language but a cluster of languages, it's kind of dialects, you can say. So, and they keep this intact in a way that they decided that this is going to be the way of the cultivation of languages, that um, they will not use a link language and they will use their own dialects, kind of, you know, coalescing together so that they can understand each other in a way and get by. So, and in the case of Luxembourg, they didn't have a national language. They use Luxembourgish, of course, nowadays, which is kind of like you can say a dialect of German in a way, for near the Western German border. And it's only because they made a conscious choice for political reasons that they should have an official language which is not French or German. But their multilingualism works in a way, Luxembourgish, of course, it's one of the official languages, work languages. And you have print format, which is mostly news, which is they consume news in German and a lot of storybooks and all those things in German. But French is the kind of like the official business language because it is the language of what do you call the like that. So it is usually the high culture language of restaurants and all those guest this kind of thing. So it is like they have a very situation there, but all the four languages thrive actually. German, and they are comfortable with English as well. So it is like a Luxembourgish person in school, they're able to learn all these four different languages and they are completely at ease in boxing in each in their its own category. So it is like they know that you can speak in Luxembourgish or German mostly at workplace, and absolutely fluent. And when the situation demands, they switch to French in the typical scenarios. And same in Switzerland actually. So you have a case where if I'm working in Zurich, for me, in my case, I have worked in Zurich only. So you have the native Zurich dialect, and from around different parts of Zurich, they have different ways of saying things. It might all same, or at least they could understand each other. So I, as a person, understand bits, but I don't actually speak the language. So I speak in the standard German, standard Swiss thing. But only in situations where you can't understand, then you switch to English. Though everyone speaks the same language, and it goes on the same way. For example, a person from Bern and the person from Zurich, they might have kind of like very different dialects. I think this people don't realize in India, because the languages can be very different in this kind of the Alpine regions, because they were kind of like segregated from one place to another for long. I mean, they didn't have much of a communication. So it is like so they could differ quite easy to understand each other as well. Kind of their national cohesion, that is a way of being Swiss for them, that they decided that this is the way they are going to build their language. Of course, being a native, they kind of got used to it, at least a couple of centuries they've been speaking it. So they have there is absolute German in all its different languages, but all its different language, they combine it into a way of saying things that they can understand each other. And where the situation demands, they use the standard German. And in school, it's the same way. The cantons have their own regional dialects as the official language, actually. It is not even German. So you have technical subjects, and most of the subjects are actually taught in the languages, the native dialect. Kind of like you have official books that are available, certain things that are available in dialect as well, and of course the standard language as well. So an option is always there for the kids, that they can actually really go outside the native language they say. And of course they are multilingual. They love to learn the three languages of which is French, Italian, and German. The through rotations at different points in time, and of course they all learn English as well. So I think they have worked out a comfortable. In India, we could do this as well. I think it's just that about what they should actually learn. So that's the main. And previously, I think I would say that there was this thing about language learning through one's own language. In fact, I learned German not through actually. I had a unique case that I learned German quite going to do my master's here. So I kind of went to learn language from a private professor. It was a German one. So I did my G1 and so in those days. So and before I Deutsch exam, so it was actually from a professor who taught through native languages actually. So basically, in my case, it was he was multilingual. He spoke Tamil, Telugu, Hindi, and he was very fluent in Sanskrit as well. Professor of German, of course, he spoke English other than knowledge of French. So he could. I mean, it was like a great, very small size class, maybe not more than 15 people. So he took and then he merely clearly made a point that we're not going to do it the way Goethe Institute does. I mean, he kind of sometimes go on a rant saying that it's called Max Muller Bhavans in India, by the way. Max Muller is a notorious figure. So it is like he says that their approach is totally wrong. You can't teach a language at the least from the basic level through the native language. They should actually grasp it in your own way. So once you have the basics, you can of course proceed learning the language through itself. And it worked out for me. Things about grammar that you learn, actually, most of the things are set in your very first year of learning, I would say. So after that, you can only build on other things, but the main things are actually coming in the very early part of your studies. So I think that worked out very well for me. I never struggled with German at all. It was kind of very easy for me, and I think that there's a real case that you actually learn through your languages better than English or any other language. I think at least the fundamentals you should have in your own language up to a certain level, maybe up to class 10 or class 12 at least. I think that would be a good case. I think. Yeah, that would be my conclusion as of now.
Yeah, I think it is already 48 minutes and we have actually started on a very, very nice note. I'm already saying that the warmth is there. I was discussing in the backdrop that we will violate the 1 hour 30-minute rule which we tried to make. So, all the best. Let's go for a roller coaster, anyways. So, I think as I hear the experiences, I live in India. So, of course, my case is not justified to even tell, okay, my experience is what. But to add on this, I even as in agreement, I think much of the pointers which have been discussed are much relatable, and I think with this I will come up with the first aspect of this discussion for which the viewers are waiting. So the first aspect is related to ecosystem languages. Now I am using this terminology with a with a sense of responsibility. I might be wrong in the field of linguistics, but I'm using it from a policy perspective. So, what happens is that in the discussion that we had with Dr. Balram Shukla, he simply stated that Sanskrit used to be an ecosystem language. And I'm using this term which I'm defining and why. What is an ecosystem language in very simple terms for layman reasons? Ecosystem languages simply means something which creates an ecosystem. It's like an aquarium, but in nature, not something artificial. You just don't have an aquarium made of glass and all of that. You have a better river, you have a Gangotri kind of thing, and you are giving space in a much naturalized and obvious fashion to with different languages per se, and the languages are learning from you as well. It's not that the language itself, which is the ecosystem itself, is not learning at all. So because dichotomy here does not exist at all. There's no obvious dichotomy by definition. There's no obvious dichotomy by practice and conduct. So that is something which has been the relationship with Sanskrit and other languages. Ironically, we might see also with Urdu and Farsi, but we are not going to discuss Urdu and Farsi right now. But a larger context discussion is Sanskrit and other Indic languages. Maybe I'll invite Dr. Shukla and maybe some other to discuss more about Urdu and Farsi. I mean, you're going to say something, Nuraj.
Yeah, so from our last discussion, we were all discussing that how there was Sanskrit and Prakrit, and these were not So there was not much difference between these two like categories. It is just that Sanskrit was like spoken in a more academic setup, and Prakrit was where people were, when the lay person were speaking with each other, they were using Prakrit. And also, for example, so like all of you discussed like your experience of mental legalism from insider perspective. Even though I am located in India, and I happen to kind of discuss, like I happen to meet like three sort of academia. Like I'm working with one Japanese professor on a project, and every Monday we meet and discuss our projects. And there are students from other countries also, like some African countries, US, UK, and also East Asian countries like Cambodia, Malaysia, these countries. And every time it happens that whenever there are Japanese students, they always speak their project in Japanese, and we have to just become a spectator there. If we don't understand Japanese, and they force us to listen to Japanese. And I also have other interaction with academia in Iran, and Iran has produced some fantastic mathematician in last few decades. Fantastic. And very interestingly, all of their education, medium of instruction, has been in Persian. And all of those mathematicians, so we keep, and in case of India, so if for example, I can study in my mother tongue, like in Hindi medium school, till 10 plus 2. But if I want to enroll myself in any higher education institution of repute, then I have to study in English medium, and that creates a difference so also language, they structure our cognitive capacities, cognitive structures. So, and so traveling from one cognitive structure to another cognitive structure makes it very difficult for many students. So that's why we see many dropouts, especially in IITs, even in institutions of humanities. And the third point I wanted to make, that like Kiran discussed, that how interaction among languages in India. For example, I don't get to read text from Telugu. So there have been many stalwarts, and I have been now exposed to many stalwarts in Telugu. But I'm doing my PhD right now, and but till this age, I have never read any Telugu stalwart. And same is true for other languages in India. And but I get to read text from Turkish, translated through English, translated through other languages. But the interaction within languages in India, the ecosystem Verdun was talking about, is on very shaky ground. So even here we need to work upon things like interaction within languages should happen more and more. And also
Sure.
the feeling those Japanese have, yeah.
So sorry, I intervene. I think yeah. So so to start forward, and I'll pass it on again to Kiran, and then Amey, then Chet, and then Kuship. I think the larger question for the part is simple. You knew that you means we all knew that ecosystem languages existed. Sanskrit was an ecosystem language, and still to some extent is, and it actually resembles. Uh, and I'm mixing the second one as well here only, so that the discussion becomes compact, and we also discuss technology, which I'm more interested to discuss, and then the important questions. Um, that Sanskrit used to be that ecosystem language, and Kiran can explain why. But Hindi is somewhere not able to do so. Now, the reasons which Dr. Shukla state, and I'll make it very brief because we have to go fast with the discussion, is that that whole connectivity of Hindi with those languages is not resembling because of the colonizing tendency which is there. And those colonizing tendencies, even I've observed when I read Hindi, when I read works in Hindi, the way people in the vernacular newspapers and all of those write, they don't write in a much perpetuated sense. Sometimes they write as if it's a formality. Sometimes even they, like, for example, you can write Nyayalaya, but you will write court. Irony. So I'll give the basic example, or you can write anything which is in Hindi, but you will just transliterate it in Hindi and make it a joke out of it. So the very word is lost. Anyone who's reading the newspaper or getting on media does not understand what is being said. And if I say words like there was a meme which was being popularized, Anurag may remember, in India, that so there was a, if all of you must have watched Ramayan, if not, of Ramanand Sagar, and there's a that character Sugriv, Sugriv and Bali, and we all know that fight of Bali and Sugriv and how Ram killed Bali. Of course, I'm not getting on the legend of that. Bali says to Sugriv in a scene, "Tu fir aa gaya nirlaj." So I asked a person, "What is nirlaj?" Sorry, I said, "See, so funny this is." The person is saying, "What is nirlaj?" So I had no words to express on that. Nirlaj is basically shameless. Sorry. So so I think that's the irony. So I think Kiran, now you can begin. Let me not take much time, and then we can pass it to Amey, then we can pass it to Chetan, and then Kushik. Enough. Yes. After that, Anurag can add.
Yeah, I really like this term ecosystem of languages, because it actually shows that like just like a natural ecosystem, it has a strength, and that strength lies in interdependence and exchange. And we call that, in Indian terms, there is this word called sattva. So this language has some native sattva. Sattva is also used as health, robustness, and it is actually when you have come to tough times, and you are, for example, today's monoculturalization of English, the language struggles. When it lacks its sattva, you kind of, at some point, the thread breaks and you just cannot speak anymore. And it happens in all languages as well. So when we speak a language, we keep using words, and each word basically is like a spark, and it connects to other words. So there is a lot of interconnections between these words that comes from etymology, and that is this sattva is very strong in some languages, and in some languages it is not so strong. And the reason is that some languages have a very well-defined grammar and a very well-defined way of analysis of this sound. And in India, that is Sanskrit. Sanskrit is not just any other language. It has actually an interesting property, which is that every sound that you speak can be analyzed and dissected, and there is a way of deriving meaning from it, and it is called yoga. So when you have a word, you kind of break it, and each sound kind of produces something. And when you add new sounds, you get new words. So it's a very in Sanskrit they call it saravat, so very fertile way of producing words. That is not there in other languages. Forget Indian languages. In other languages, it's very, very rare. In European languages, for example, Greek has that to some extent. So this is why when you use scientific terminology, a lot of that terminology is derived from Greek, because it is easy to connect concepts and bring things together. So a lot of English words, what we think of as English, is actually Greek. Latin has it to a lesser extent. So this is why actually in science and technology, words are borrowed from Greek and less so from Latin. Latin, from juridical point of view, you borrow more from Latin. So languages are not equal. There are different levels. So it is quite okay to say that Hindi does not have the same level of capacity as Sanskrit. But actually, the way we should look at Indian languages, and Balaram Shukla's argument was similar. Prakrit and Sanskrit are two registers of the same language continuum. So you use Prakrit, and Sanskrit exists at the heart of it. So it kind of is a slight morphological transformation of the Sanskrit sound. And this is how we understood Indian languages, not just North Indian languages. I come from South India, I speak Telugu, and this is how native Telugu grammarians understood Telugu. That Sanskrit is at the heart, the so-called Tatsama words, and then you have Tadbhava words, and then you have some words which are not analyzed to that level of dense phoneme level analysis, like in Sanskrit, and these are variations that change according to the region. So region is Disha, Deshya. Desya words are vocabulary which are different according, and you have even further down is Gramya, which are words that are specific to a small village or something. So what happens is that when you move further and further away from this dense analysis, from this Saravat, these languages are like grass. They just blow away in the flood. Whereas Sanskrit is like a banyan tree. It would just stay put, very strong tree. So that based on that, other species can grow, and then you can exchange things. So this understanding was lost in India because of the colonial experience. So they actually impose this idea that Sanskrit is a foreign language, which is absurd. Secondly, that it is a dead language, that it is not evolving. It is also wrong. It keeps evolving every single century. And the way of analysis is just like this. You kind of use all these words that in regular life, in Prakrits, and when words become more and more analyzed, you bring them into the Sanskrit core. So this is how the language keeps growing. And that tradition was lost, and it's a disaster for our science and for our technology. And today we kind of don't do that regularly. So we don't regularly keep looking at our terms and kind of build new terminology and so on. Once we start that, so I kind of started this as a hobby to translate scientific texts and scientific information into Telugu. Just words don't exist, doesn't matter, I try. And as I do that, what I realized was that after about a year, I actually remember the words. I know what word to use. It takes less time. And it's a process. Everybody needs to be trained. And this, if we are doing it in a social context and all our intellectuals get together, we will rebuild our Sanskrit. That is for sure. There is no other way. This is how India functions. We will have our ecosystem back. But what is happening instead is that we borrow words from foreign language like English, and actually within English from Greek, which we don't know anything at all. A lot of people just keep using the words without realizing how these words are connected, right? So for example, since I kind of spent some time abroad in France and Germany, and German doesn't, for example, borrow from Greek. German derives the words from native Germanic terminology, and it's very interesting and illuminating to study how they do that. And if you try to replicate this aspect in our native languages, whether that be Hindi or Telugu, we will recreate it, actually, the entire vocabulary. And once we have a core set of vocabulary and keep using it, our languages will become more and more powerful. So yeah, it's a tough call how to rebuild that ecosystem of languages, especially when everybody, our elite is convinced that English will do the job, right? They just don't realize that English works perhaps for 1%. I would not even say 5%. 5% speak, but they speak pathetically. Very few people actually understand English to a level of communicating in an intellectual level. But even that 1%, right, would benefit from being rooted in the native languages. And what happens, sadly, is that what happens to the remaining 95%, 99%? They are just junked. We don't care. And we are actually losing, at least to my guess, it's like 5 to 6 points of GDP just by discarding a lot of our talent. In our universities, English fluency has become a predictor for how well they do later. It's such a disaster. So to my experience, I have worked with Chinese, I worked with Russians in my research career. And my Chinese friend, he always used to carry a glossary and a textbook in Chinese of the scientific text, and used to refer to that. Like, he used to write proper English, right? He's very good at that, but he used to refer to that. My Russian friend, very interestingly, used to have a German book. So he studied in Germany, his bachelor's, so he was very fluent in German. So he used to refer to all these mathematical terms in German. So, and naturally also in Russian. So this support we don't have for Indian languages. We don't when we have students who come from villages or native cultures, they just are expected to speak English. If they will pick up, at some point, people get brainwashed. And if they're good enough, we have smart people. After a few years, some of them would be fluent in English. But the thing is, we are losing a lot of bandwidth, a lot of intellectual, creative bandwidth by just imposing this. And this we need to change, otherwise we will not grow. So it's like an economic thing as well. So and we need to communicate beyond our technical field. So work in the context of engineers, maybe there is an elite who would be able to speak English. But when these engineers have to work with artisans, with creative people, with factory workers, everybody, they will not have, obviously, this level of English. They will have to be communicative in their native languages. And these engineers cannot speak the native language. So this happens exclusively to India, which is a disaster. This is why the IITs are not able to make an impact on the market. It's really sad. We can do a lot more if we are able to communicate and establish this bandwidth. So like what you said, this ecosystem, and that ecosystem will not come from English. Fact. So we have to treat that as a problem for, like, let's say 10, 20 years, and we have to take advantage of technologies, is slowly moving on to the next field, to kind of build that thing. So I will stop here to this thing, and maybe Abhivardhan can ask other panelists.
And as we go ahead with Amir's pointers, and of course then Chetan's presentation, which I will show, and Chetan can. Okay, I think Kushik will be back in a while, maybe network issues. So I'm going to show something to the viewers because they should know about what we're talking about at the end of the day. I found this tweet and somebody wrote Bharat champion hai. I quote tweeted and said Bharat parajit hai, and why. So let me share the screen. And with utmost respect to the former diplomat in India for some other European country, I'm sharing the tweet. So they expressly shared this that highly educated migrants come from, according to Statista, are from India and then China, 3.12 million. Ironically, that's a loss for India because you're just like sucking up the talent, which Richard was talking about the last discussion, that it's just the same happening with Eastern Europe. Then you know what, just sucking up the talent, going to the other part, and that's just leaving an old age population. However, that cannot happen with India because you have a big youthful population. But again, that's a different question altogether. I'm not getting on demographics, but ironically, this is what people should always remember, that even our prime minister said it in India. Oh, you know what? India is exporting talent. I mean, that's not good. If you're exporting talent, you are not focusing on anything else. And then what happens is, unfortunately, the government bodies and think tanks will come in and say, you know what, we have a deficit of talent. We should go with Indo-US and all of that. Fine, theek hai. And I mean, there's a larger scope to the world, and there is a larger to see. So until Kushik is there. So Amey, I think you can now continue. You can add up your points. Then Chetan's presentation is there, and then Kushik. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Abhivardhan. Yeah, okay. So I think we started talking a bit about the economic issues as well, but just to go back to your question, I think you were focusing mainly on ecosystem and where Hindi has failed or maybe not failed. But I would actually remind people, right, before actually talking about where Hindi has failed in terms of being this ecosystem generator, right? There's a lot to be proud of in terms of its success, right? And I think one of the things that I encourage viewers to do is actually take a look at the Indian census, right? Because I think there's a lot of information that one can glean from it there. And, it confirms our intuition on some things, but there are some myths that it also dispels. And I think the important thing to note, I mean, there's a lot of information there, but if you go back to the last census, which we have access to, which is 2011, you see that actually, first of all, there are many bilingual speakers in India. There aren't as many trilingual or more. I think that's in the single digits in terms of percentage. But in terms of so first language, there aren't that many people who speak English, right? It's a very minuscule percentage. And what they classify as Hindi, there's about 43 or 44% who speak it as a first language, that is Hindi. And then when it comes to second language learners, I think this is quite interesting. There are a lot more people who learn Hindi than English. I think it's about a factor of 2 or so. So, and we have seen this consistent rise in the number of people who speak Hindi. So, for instance, even if you go to non-Hindi-speaking states like Gujarat or Maharashtra, there something like 35% learn Hindi as a second language. English is only 2% or something like this. If you go to even the northeast part of India, for instance, Arunachal Pradesh, about half the people learn Hindi as a second language. So there is still this fact that Hindi is the only language that is understood by more than 50% of the population, and no other language comes close. So that being said, yeah. So I think it is fair to say that there is no real link language per se in India, but insofar as there is one, I think Hindi is the one. in terms of English, that's really more of a language of the urban elite, I would say, right? That's true. So where has Hindi failed, right? So I think to go back to the question, right? I think, or why has it failed, right? I think there is this kind of geographical or regional association that Hindi unfortunately suffers from, which to some extent is true because it is a language of the North. But that being said, it doesn't quite capture the true situation because as Anurag alluded to earlier, there's all these languages which are now considered under the umbrella of Hindi, such as Awadhi, Bhojpuri, Brajbhasha, and so forth. So it's not quite true, but unfortunately, this is the image, and I think it leads to various ideological battles. And then, unfortunately, it is forced into this position where, on the one hand, Hindi has to fight English as kind of this link language on one side, and the arguments we all know are about globalism and how the world is using English and so forth. And then on the other side, it is in this battle with the other regional languages such as Telugu and Marathi and such. So I think this kind of two-front battle is actually impedes progress, and it's unfortunate because we get into these debates about link language, right? This is the primary discussion that we have been having for the last 50 years or so. But I think there are actually equally important, if not more important, issues that need to be discussed, which are completely independent of this link language. Such as education in the mother tongue and education policy in general. But unfortunately, there's this specter of the link language that always comes in, and I think that actually impedes creation of an ecosystem in which you can have a symbiotic relationship between say Hindi or Sanskrit or whatever it may be, and other regional languages where they enrich each other, right? Especially in modern discourse and technological concepts. So I think this is largely the problem, and I would say that there's still this approach to Indian languages when you see a lot of like government initiatives or even like Hindi Divas, right? The way that it operates. There's this tendency to treat Indic languages as kind of a museum object, right? Sort of, these are things to be studied in the museum, and oh, here's this ancient culture. But languages are only important insofar as they are relevant to the modern world, right? And this is the thing we have to understand, right? The people who push English, well, if you're basically removing Indian languages from a path of development, which by the way is hurting 90% of the population, then you're essentially taking out this the sattva or whatever you want to call it, right? And so really what we need is Indic languages to be a vehicle to development or economic growth. And that means, we are going to have to bring them into the technological world and be able to do research in these languages or discuss higher concepts. And I think there were some initiatives on this early on, right? It was actually, I think it was Chetan who pointed out this wonderful essay. It was by Ram Manohar Lohia, who talked about feudal languages versus language of the people. So this essay is from 1962. I urge people to look at it again. It's not too long. But one of the questions he raised was that, okay, we need to train, I don't know, a few million people to be scientists and, people who have technological literacy. And do you really think just thrusting English on everybody is going to work? This is actually an astute observation that he made 60 years ago. So I think that's still relevant. In the 60s, you did have some initiatives in this direction, right? There was this CSTT, this Center for Scientific and Technology Terminology, right? This initiative to try to translate various technological terms and everything in the Indian languages. But again, there hasn't been tons of progress since then, right? And I think it is now that we are really having this discussion. So I think the focus really needs to be on how to make these languages relevant in the world. And I do think I do think it's actually necessary for growth, as Kiran alluded to, because if you're basically denying a path of development or higher educational attainment to more than 90% of the population, you're effectively functioning with a talent pool that is 1/10 the size of what it should be. And yeah, that's basically the point I wanted to make.
Amazing, amazing. I mean, very exploratory points. And once Kushik, Chetan, and Anurag are done, if Anurag wishes to add something, I will have a follow-up question, but not right now. So Chetan, should we start with your presentation maybe?
Yes, we can. Or I wanted to show you. Can you guess what this is? That's a Russian
Wow.
Chinese dictionary in 2 volumes. And
Wow.
unfortunately, I have a Chinese Hindi dictionary. It's barely 100 pages, and someone literally drew the Chinese characters with their hand, because probably we cannot publish Chinese characters. We don't have such a printing press in India. And another thing that this is a real thing. That's a course of mathematical analysis in 2 volumes. Oh, sorry, four. So now you are competing against people who speak their own language. So and I look at the points again and again and again, and it's already been 70 years. And it's much better to start probably with state languages. And once, for example, you have Kannada medium universities in Karnataka and Punjabi medium in Punjab, a link language will emerge automatically. For example, an equation in Punjabi is Samikaran. In Kannada, it's Samikaran. Probably in Hindi and Bengali and Telugu, it's also Samikaran.
Samikaran in Hindi. Yeah.
So once you start learning in your own language, you will find a common vocabulary, which is again Tatsama or Tatabhava. And then a link language will automatically emerge. Under the current circumstances, it will be very close to Hindi, if not Hindi. But yeah, I believe we should start maybe we can start with the states. Okay, leave the Supreme Court. Only about 50 or 60,000 cases are pending there. But in district courts and in high courts, there are about I don't remember 2 or 3 crore cases pending. So at least they can switch to state languages immediately. Chennai can function, and if
yes.
And if there is an escalation, then someone can translate all the material, all the documents from Tamil into English or Hindi into English. For the time being, the Supreme Court can function in English, but let the high courts and the district courts function in their respective state languages. And oh yes, now the slide. I'll be very quick. Try to be.
Sure. Just for a minute.
So, why is English? Okay, English is great as a language, but this is I wrote it in Russian to just convey a point. This is the experience. This is what an ordinary child. At least this is what I felt when I first saw a book in English. In 11th standard, the teacher was speaking in again Punjabi, but suddenly but the language on the blackboard in the books was a foreign one, just as you see now, and you feel yourself stupid. Okay, here I just listed 3 reasons for the pathetic situation of our Indian languages. Okay, I believe the slide 2. And a solution. Of course, I know it's not going to have much of an impact, because sometimes I feel we just kind of armchair philosophers thinking. And the people who can really do something, they're fighting on the roads. So they are going to have more of an impact than that's just a hypothesis. Okay, can we move this presentation to the next? Under trials, Shikshak Mahsu. Okay, again. So here I think first, why do we educate people as a nation? We should ask ourselves. Then I'll talk about again this Awadhi and Bhojpuri versus Hindi thing, and finally a few comments on the link language. Okay, the third slide. We could. Recently, I believe in Andhra Pradesh, the Chief Minister Jagan Reddy, he tried to switch all the educational institutions to English. So English, but for some reason, I believe he could not do that. And one of the reasons he gave this article is on theprint.in, was that we really don't have any factories. We cannot employ our own people, so let them migrate. We're going to teach them in English so that they can migrate. I believe that's not a really convincing argument, because then as a system or as government, you are again running away. You're escaping from your own responsibilities. Your job is to create employment, to create, let's say, to set up factories, to set up hospitals and colleges. If you cannot do that, then you're essentially being escapist. And a similar thing happened in Punjab. So Andhra and Punjab, they're probably more than 2,000 kilometers away, but they introduced their own IELTS exam to help children migrate to Canada. But after some, no, that really sounds ridiculous. If they, aha, okay. Now, I believe if that's our goal, to export manpower, then probably English medium works, because the Philippines exports manpower, and we will export manpower. Nigeria will export manpower. At least maybe 1 or 2 million, or perhaps 1 crore Indians can migrate out of India. But for the other 129 crore, or whatever their number is, they'll keep living in poverty. That's still, again, not a very great model, I believe, to live on what we call to live on if when an immigrant sends money back to their home country.
Remittances.
Remittances. Thank you. Okay, the fourth slide. I wrote it in Russian and in Hindi just to again show you what goes on in the mind of a child when they see a text in English in the classroom. So again, that was the government. Even in the middle classes, when you talk with them, or probably the elites. So they have this dream. Oh, look at the Fortune 500 companies. You have Sundar Pichai, then you have maybe 3 or 4 other CEOs who are leading huge companies. If everyone learns through English, then we can probably then the CEOs of these Fortune 500 companies will be all Indians. But again, that's again, I believe that misses the point. China now has more Fortune 500 companies than America, and our English is not going to help you help you there. Finally, even if, let's assume, America, all the Fortune 500 companies are America, then merely to help those 500 Indians become CEOs, which is again impossible, not going to happen anytime soon, or probably will never happen. To teach 1 billion people in English, it doesn't really make sense. Then finally, okay, then people say, we have this IT industry. The last time I checked, about 40 or 46 lakh people work in the IT industry. And Oh, great. But for these 46 lakh people, you're saying, okay, let everyone study in English. That again doesn't really make sense. And despite having a huge IT industry, we have yet to create, again, aside a few exceptions, probably, there might be one or two exceptions, maybe products that are used around the world, or even even in I took the example of this search engines. Google is probably banned in China, so we can ignore it. But Google works in Russia and in South Korea. In both of these countries, their homegrown search engines are more popular than Google. In Russia, Yandex holds probably 56 or 60% of the search market. In Korea, now in English, or Nebo in Russian, holds again is the dominant search engine. Finally, someone said, "Oh, if we study in English, we can go abroad and study." Well, that's great, but not everyone can go abroad. So, as a national policy, for individuals, it's great. You do what you want, but as a national policy, studying. Forcing everyone to study in English, that I think isn't really a good idea. Last year, probably less than 3 lakh Indians went abroad, and how many graduated? I believe probably 5 crore, 6 crore. I do not know, but that must have been a huge number. So then again, okay, the next slide. Uh-huh. So this is the interesting part. When you try to talk to people, let everyone study in their mother tongue, and suddenly someone comes and comments, "Hey, what about Bhojpuri? What about Awadhi? What about, let's say, some obscure dialect of Punjabi?" Even Punjabi has 3 or probably about 10 major dialects. So, and then we have a small state. So I wanted to compare. I took this table from a Russian textbook, spoken Tamil language and its dialects. In the first column, you can see Tamil, how it's spoken, and in the second column, Tamil, how it's written, and in the fourth column, what it means. So my father is Enkappa in spoken Tamil, but when you write Enkalappa. They are, at least to me, they sound as different as probably Awadhi and Hindi. But again, people in Tamil Nadu, they do not consider this diaglossic situation as anything extraordinary. For them, they're merely 2 registers of one language. So that's what again about Hindi. So Hindi can be the higher register. People can still speak in Awadhi or Punjabi or Tamil. No, with Awadhi and Bhojpuri, yeah. There was, I believe, a German linguist. He suggested this concept of Ausbau and Abstand languages. So, in case of related languages, for instance, Maithili and Bengali, or Awadhi and Hindi, you can. It's politics that decides if they are going to be 2 different languages, or the dialect, or maybe 2 dialects of one language. For instance, that was even the case with Punjabi. Probably 100 years ago, it was by many considered a dialect of Hindi. But because of politics, it's now a separate language. Across the border in Kashmir, they speak Punjabi, at least some of them in Jammu. But a few years ago, their dialect, they just somehow convinced the central government, and now their dialect of Punjabi is a separate language, Dogari. Of course, now I won't argue with them, or they will again, they'll thrash me. But what I merely wanted to say, show you through this slide, is that when languages are similar, which in India they tend to be. Of course, no one will argue Hindi and Tamil are 2 dialects of one language, but Hindi and Punjabi, or Hindi and Awadhi, they will always be politics. So these questions cannot be decided by science. They, again, will be decided by politics. Okay, the next slide again. So here's an example. I believe everyone can read the Devanagari, and there are two different languages according to the Indian government right now. So I took the first sentence from a textbook of the 6th class in I believe Jammu and Kashmir board, and translated it into Punjabi. So that's all. At least to most Punjabis, Dogri is nothing but, again, a dialect of Punjabi, or just Punjabi. But for them, they change the script, and now it's a separate language. So no science involved. It's just sheer politics. I'm not using it in a bad sense that politics is always bad, but I'm just saying, for instance, this Maithili, 20 years ago, it was a dialect of Hindi. Now it's a separate language. Who knows? Probably 10 years from now, it will again be a dialect of Hindi. Depends on who's in power. Okay, again, the next slide. So these fights over language and dialects, they're not specific to India. You can find them in former Yugoslavia, where they had Serbo-Croatian until the 1990s, and now there are 5 or 6 separate languages, probably 4: Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian, and there's a 4th one, little one. Ditto with Hindi and Urdu. So that's again one language, but no one. I think in a previous episode, someone already discussed this again controversy in detail. And Russian and Ukrainian. I once read Gogol, who people asked him, why don't you write in Ukrainian instead of Russian, because you are ultimately Ukrainian. And Gogol, he wrote in beautiful literary Ukrainian, which was identical with Russian. So again, but now no one will believe you if you say Ukrainian and Russian are two dialects of one language. And on the opposite end of the spectrum are languages such as Chinese and Arabic, where people in Morocco and people in Iraq probably cannot understand each other if they speak their speak in their own dialects. But they still have a superimposed language, these literary Arabic, which unites them. So Hindi plays, I believe, a similar role in the Hindi states. So. Maybe if someone speaks in Rajasthani and the other person in Bhojpuri, they probably cannot get along. But Hindi unites them. That's probably an umbrella language or an umbrella dialect, just as Hochdeutsch, people who I believe live in Germany or have heard about, must have heard about it. Hochdeutsch. That's again the umbrella or standard German, which unites again various parts of Germany, because I believe a Bavarian might or might not understand a Swiss dialect. So there are again two opposite spectrums. Very similar languages can be divided, and very different languages can be again united. Okay, the 8th slide. Finally, what do we have? So, but again, a linked language is again a real problem, but we don't have to again, as we say in physics, put the cart before the horse. Let people first study in Tamil and Telugu and Punjabi and Bengali. A linked language will take care of it of itself. And another thing that can be, when I came here, I found some products from Himalaya. Himalaya, I think everyone has heard about it. It's an Indian company. They create and manufacture shampoos and lots of other products. So in Russia, when they sell their products, all the information, all this is in Russian. And Russia has a population of about 15 crore. and UP alone has a population of 20 crore, that made me wonder, why can't we have, I mean, at least all the information are that's on medicines, because many patients cannot even, they cannot read the prescription that a doctor writes. They cannot even understand the salts that are mentioned on the strips. So I believe that information should be in state languages, and that at least if you want to sell, let's say, maybe a cancer drug, or maybe even Croson in, let's say, Andhra Pradesh, then you should at least provide a translation into Telugu. There can be a Kannada translation as well, because of course you're not going to because they're again neighboring states, and that's what okay, that's a real problem. Maybe that again, it will depend upon the government to see how to solve it. And finally, we cannot have a one language for everyone, because but then it raises a question, how the state is going to function, because the state has tons of problems to solve. It cannot be multilingual. If let's say one IES officer speaks only Tamil and the other only Punjabi, then it's also a problem. It's also again a problem. Having Hindi or as the only state language, again, that puts maybe non-Hindi speakers at a disadvantage, because then they have to study again first Hindi and then compete against people from Uttar Pradesh or Bihar. Their situation is not going to be is not going to change much. So a solution can be to maybe hire only those people who speak two Indian languages, one of which is Hindi. Which means if you're from Uttar Pradesh, you won't get a government job until central government job until you speak Hindi, maybe, or Bengali, or maybe Tamil. And for others, of course, Hindi is the natural choice. Okay, this is second to last slide. Uh-huh. So that's what, again, this is neither new nor my original idea. That's it's already, I believe Amaya said, or maybe Kiran said, or maybe Kushika. That's that's already the case in Switzerland. Everyone studies in their own language, but the second, then they learn a Swiss language in the foreign language. So that's again, I just shamelessly copied from them. Everyone can study in their state language, and on top of that, learn an Indian language and a foreign language as subjects. Most are going to stick with the Hindi English duo, but you will still find many exceptions. So that's all from my side. Oh, I hope I took. Oh God.
So let's steer it forward. I think Chetan has discussed so many aspects. Then I actually have to fast forward and go to technology. But before that, the follow-up question I'll inevitably ask. Let Kushik give his points, and then I'll ask the follow-up question, so that we move ahead to technology. Yes, Kushik, are you there?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things he has covered actually. The overall state of the scenario is that it would be good to have the building blocks of learning, the essential things outside the curricular activities as well, because right now we do have some level of state education in native languages, but it has to be augmented by what we are able to imagine outside this space as well, because that's where your real creativity comes in. We need a genre of writers writing great science fiction, for example, and other materials that are available that people can actually learn to think through this the modern world, imagine the modern world through their native language, and then bring it to in their professional activities. I think the larger point about what happens in professional education beyond a point is kind of inevitable in a country like India. In a country like dialects, it's like, if you go beyond the number of states and the official languages, you would say you have more than 200 languages and thousands of dialects in India. So it's not possible that you can have mother tongue education in all these languages. So at some point you have to be practical as well. So I think English kind of serves a purpose at maybe college level, and up to that point maybe it's good to have have a mother tongue and cultivate thinking through creativity through other means in your mother tongue as well, apart from English, so that you can develop multilingual competencies. Because I think in today's world we cannot avoid English. So it's about how much we can complement our learning in our native tongues and in English, and possibly more languages that uses an edge actually. So this, the more you know, the better, right?
Sure. You wish to add something? Go ahead, Chetan. Yeah.
Yes, I believe the discussion is not against English, but English as the medium of instruction or as a subject. And that too, not mandatory. For example, where I live right now, here the most popular language is German in schools. Not English. Probably English will be the most popular language in another 10 years, but right now it's German. And if you tell people, because English is a global language, so these Russian mathematicians should write all their books in English, they'll simply laugh at you.
I want to add another point here. We generally, a lot of people who also advocate language education in India, they kind of are happy if the school education is in the native language. But very few people actually move forward and argue for professional education. I think it's a serious mistake, and we really need professional education, at least the education that gives you a job in the native tongue, because otherwise there is no economic incentive. So it is always be extra hobby or extra thing what we do. But until and unless there is an economy that is basically running on this language operating system, then until then it will not be a self-sustaining thing. And actually, Ameya mentioned in the 60s there was some effort to translate technical terminology into Indian languages, and it was abandoned. And we see the effect. So until the 1980s, there was professional education like BSc, BA in native Indian languages. In the 90s and 2000s, a lot of young Indians moved to engineering. Engineering and medicine and law are not available in native Indian languages. Actually, maybe in Tamil Nadu, I heard there is some engineering education, but it's very rare. And we don't have an ecosystem. We don't have functional professional education in Indian languages. And that is the key difference from what my experience is. Until we get there and we have like a functioning economy of, in the native languages, it will not really kickstart the whole process. So until then, it will just be like, some museum object. What Abhay mentioned, that is definitely not good. And we should definitely move on to a full functional education with all the technical terminology in native languages, which is also the sad case in my state, Andhra Pradesh. It's somehow taken for granted that professional education cannot be in Telugu. And that is actually the reason why all the parents say, oh, we want to send our kids to English medium, because what happens afterwards? After the school, they learn in English anyway. So until we give a valid reason why there is a hope and a future in native languages in professional education, people would just switch to English medium. That is the economically sensible decision. So I think I'll just stop here. And Abhivardhan, maybe you move on to other points.
Sure. So I think we should go ahead with the question of technology and the role of technology. And I think I just came to know that in Banaras Hindu Vishwavidyalaya or Banaras Hindu University to say, BTech is now also taught in Hindi. So thank you so much, Anurag, for letting me know. And it's really great news to share. I think it should start in other universities as well. I mean, I am from UP. I will say start in Allahabad University, Prayagraj, and also Lucknow University. I think it's a very good way to start with. So now I'll ask
Yeah.
questions on technology, but
Okay.
of course I was going to have a yeah. You wish to say something, Chetan? Just very
Just
brief, very brief. Yeah.
very quick. Yeah. So I just remember when my wife came to India, she started learning Hindi, and but within 2 months she gave up. I asked her the reason. She said, "Because you people don't respect your own languages. Why should I bother?" and and then she switched to Sanskrit. At least I can find something to read in Sanskrit. What I'm going to do with Hindi or Punjabi? So that I just raise this point because if we don't offer this professional education or medicine degrees in Hindi and other Indian languages, no one is going to do it for us. So that's all.
Yeah, so I just shared the good news again by sharing the screen. So let's go ahead with technology because we have to discuss technology, and that has been the second part of this title itself, and we're not doing it is very unjust. So, first of all, I think the question that I was going to ask was should English be completely scrapped off or not? And I think this has been relevantly discussed about. And I think the answer is simply nobody needs to do that. I mean, with time, जैसे कहते हैं ना in Hindi, समय काल के हिसाब से स्थितियां बदलती हैं वैसे ही होगा. Accordingly, languages will get their own value, and English can stay as a quote unquote global language. I mean, for so many people, Mandarin is also a global language. French is also a global language, right? I mean, you can add German also. So, yeah, to an extent, I would add Arabic also because of the larger population in West Asia. So, fine. Let's not get on that debate at all. I mean, there's no necessity for that per se because it gets polemic. Now, on technology, um I've been quite interested in the role of AI education for a long time, and the reason why I've been interested in is that AI is a disruptive tech which is very omnipresent. It's something which, and again, I'm not saying everything is AI. I mean, let's say I also understand from the field of technology, not technology, and I understand that all machine learning algorithms don't form that absolute AI which everybody talks about. So I'm not getting on the basics of, the rhetoric on AGI and so on. But one thing to start with is that languages play a very interesting role in shaping up our way of doing things, and they upskill us as well as downskill us in some way. So let us say that when it comes to considering knowledge economy, let us assume that Hindi and the regional languages get some ecosystem spirit, that political clout is gone to some extent. I think that has a lot to do with economic also. I think the per capita income is not good in India right now. It needs to go up. Even if the GDP is going great for a while, I've heard that the Ministry of Finance has stated that I think we will cross a good number of economic growth. The PMI says fine, but it doesn't translate very well on ground right now. But we need to see. So, since that is the very question here, my point was that as a technology, what I've seen is that AI can very directly affect people, whether children or adults, at a very larger level. It's very technocratic by nature, right? And I'm not talking about some doomsday scenario of Matrix or Jurassic Park type of thing. I can talk about any basic AI technology. I can talk about Translate. I can talk about Siri. I can talk about anything. And we see those conundrums that they technocratize, they influence, and the influence is very obvious for many, but again it is monopolistic, sometimes monopsonic, because you all of must have heard very weird news that people are trying to make music through AI, but ironically it's not that human creativity which is there, it's just again the same issue. So let me ask Amir to begin, then Kiran can add in, and then I think other speakers can weigh in. And I'll ask more follow up questions, but currently from a background perspective. And it cannot be just on AI, it can be on any disruptive tech for that matter. So, Amir, I think, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. There's a lot to unpack there. But yeah, let me try to set up some context, right? So I think just if we look at the global picture in the 21st century, you have some shifting of I guess, the world order, and Asia will be a place of increasing importance. We've seen great growth with China. India is also on an upward trajectory, as Abhivadan alluded to. And I think that India stands to reap some benefits, but I think really it depends on what kind of policies we pursue and what kind of reforms we make to the education system. So one of the big things that I guess India has as an advantage is really the demographics, right? It has a much younger population compared to other countries such as the US, Western European countries, and even China, has experienced a lot of growth, but they're really battling an aging population. And I think in my view, a lot of the recent steps they've taken around social engineering are designed to kind of reverse those adverse demographic trends. On the other hand, India does have a population that is median population of under 30, right? So which is quite young. Now, so basically, as a lot of experts would say, this is a potentially large labor force, and there is a pool of talent that is waiting to be tapped into. So the question for India is how to build a skilled labor force that can, propel the country to higher economic achievements in a way that brings prosperity for the country and long-term security. And to do that, I would argue again, you need to focus on an education system and a development that is inclusive to all, right? This is what other countries have managed to do. I think India has not been effectively able to do this because of the point that I mentioned earlier, which is that 90% of people are essentially excluded from higher educational attainment and such. So to just give you a sense of the inadequacies, right? There was some study, I think it was the National Employment Report for Engineers or something like this from 2 years ago. And one of the findings was that 80% of engineers coming out of Indian institutions lack basic skills and are essentially unemployable, of no use in the economy. And I think only about 5 or 6% even had basic coding skills. And furthermore, there's about 2.5% who have any sort of skills relating to AI. So this should already set off a lot of alarm bells, right? Because AI is undoubtedly going to be of increasing importance and will be a disruptive force. Yet we have very few people who are have the skills to think about these issues. And even if you compare, like I think one of the points that has been sold to us has been that, okay, India has this English advantage and that is going to propel the country forward, and that's why we're doing well. But if you look at this question objectively and kind of get rid of all the politics or the ideology, right? Just let's look at the stats, right? You don't really see that, right? Because if you see the countries that have managed to develop well, one of the things that they did well is, first of all, educate in the lingua franca of the country, and basically, focus on the skills like problem solving, creative thinking, these kind of things, right? So I think that's something that needs to be focused on. And I think one other issue with the English, right? So basically, up until now, I think a lot of the growth in India has been due to the IT sector and the software industry, call center jobs, things like this. And I think it has essentially been based on some kind of wage arbitrage, right? But this cannot be a long-term solution. And I think AI has the potential to be a disruptive force here, where these kind of jobs will become increasingly automated. I think there's a big push, for instance, in a lot of tech companies and academic research to look at conversational AI, right? This is AI to facilitate interactive conversations between people, and that has been making a lot of progress. So it's quite easy to see how, say, call center jobs will be, automated using this kind of technology. and I think this gets at like one of the big issues, which is that there's a difference between being a consumer of technology and being a thought leader of technology. And I think this is the problem that India is essentially facing, right? Okay, we talk about this all these government policies with payment solutions and the way Aadhaar is done and all these things. And yeah, we are using increasingly more technology, but we're not really developing it in a way that produces intellectual property for India or fundamental research. And I think this is the thing that needs to be changed, and you cannot do it unless you first make reforms to the education system that include everyone. So just to give you an example, right? If you look at China, for instance, right, they've made tremendous progress, and they are actually churning out research papers in AI. They're building institutions that are doing fundamental research in AI, and in terms of patents on AI, it's the U.S. is obviously one of the top players, and China is not far behind. I publish in some computer science venues on artificial intelligence and machine learning, and even there you can see there's a conference called AAAI, which is on artificial intelligence. One of the former presidents of the parent organization was tweeting out a couple of years ago. I think this was based on maybe like 2017 or 2018 data, but I think for the first time among the accepted papers, there were more Chinese than, say, Americans. So that gives you a sense of what's happening. And I don't think we are even at the point where we can have this kind of conversation in India. And I think there are a lot of fundamental reforms that will need to take place and change the thinking.
Great. Kiran, would you like to add? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it's very interesting point on changing technology in the AI and where India is really lagging behind. So I can give an example. Like I teach in Germany, and a lot of my students are quite fluent in English. So they would be able to read a research paper or a textbook in English, but they all prefer to give their presentations in German. So they will translate effortlessly all the terminology into German. They read in an English research paper, and they give the presentation in German. Why is that? Because their brain is far more efficient in their mother tongue. And this is really a huge creative boost. And we just don't have understanding of this because we Indians don't experience it. We are actually broken in our flow. We just stop as a kind of a jargon replication through our mouth, and that is it. We don't have a deeper understanding, and that's fundamental, and that's actually affects our creative output and our scientific output. Maybe a few people would be so natively good in English, urban elites, or maybe they are very good at picking languages and they will be able to switch, but the rest would just be stuck in a simple replication. So they would not be creative producers. In computer science, there is a very famous researcher, Alan Kay, who achieved a Turing Award. So he had a very nice comparison. So he said that a lot of the geeks, programming geeks, computer engineers, they used to, they don't do that anymore, but they used to learn a lot of Unix commands. So they know how to do something on Unix. And they would be able to do that, and they would think that they are actually a very good computer scientist. And he would say that that is actually a way of using this operating system, and you just know how to click a button, something not deep. So he is promoting that if you have a programming language, that is very powerful, you would be able to implement all the thought and everything through that, and you'll be able to interact through it and get instantaneous results and all that. At some point, the operating system would be superfluous. You can just delete it. So that's a way of looking at this problem. And he would say that you would be, it's a bit like a Jedi. You would be so good at information thinking that you don't really need this third-party black box where you click. So this is actually how language works. It's AI is a bit like language, and you when you start thinking so effortlessly, and you're able to connect all these concepts together, you would be producing creativity and not just using some tool or some external element. So the question really is, we are not at that level in India. Other countries are at that level. Some of them are our competition, and we need to really catch up. Otherwise, we will miss out on a lot of our development. So it's really a fundamental do or die kind of a situation for us, and we have to find bridges for this. And the key thing is, how do we get teachers and university lecturers to be able to build this flow of technology-driven education in native languages, AI or computer science or engineering, medicine. They need to be done in native languages, and teachers don't like to switch. They are comfortable. They learned their education terminology in English, and they don't want to switch to Telugu or Hindi or whatever, right? So this is a problem. And we need to kind of motivate them to do that. And at some point, there will be a sufficient pool of people who can do all this, and we will have a self-replicating thing, but we are not there yet. So what happened was, actually in the 70s and 80s, in science education, in BSc and BA and so on, there was also a reaction, and teachers didn't want to switch to native languages. There was actually a terminology books published, but people preferred to speak in English or teach in English. They were not fluent in English, but they would use the English terms, so on. So at some point of training, they were able to get to that level. So we really have to think how we can leverage technology and make it a tool for people to be more and more fluent in their own native languages. Or maybe somebody like me, I'm a Telugu speaker, but let's say I get a job in PHU in Varanasi, and I would like to teach in Hindi. I should be able to pick up that terminology and fluency. So let's look at what other countries are doing, right? So they have a systematic grading of language skill, and they would be giving exams to test the fluency and proficiency of people, A1, A2 for beginners, B1, B2 for middle level, C1, C2 for advanced level. We don't even have that for Indian language. We don't have language. So we just are at a blank. So let's say somebody wants to learn Hindi or Telugu at a professional level, they cannot do it. Even a foreigner, a lot of journalists come and work in India, they cannot speak Indian languages. They're pretty stupid. They just navigate in their bubble and they relate news. They just don't understand how India works. And we cannot find fault with them, right? Because we just don't give the material. There is no material to learn Indian languages. So first, we have to get books and some basic levels, but we can also think of computer programs and multimedia material for learning languages, right? So there is actually apps for learning languages, and a lot of them are AI-driven, but not at a very high level. But the advantage we have now at this state of the progress in technology is that AI is getting very good at actually producing language. It's not that good, like not professional level, but it is getting better and better. So we can also analyze how a student is learning a language and give a set of game-like challenges that they need to solve. And while they're doing that, and it can also be like a social game where people can play with each other and test how good their language skill is, and how better they got over the couple of last weeks or so on. And these language learning tools can be AI driven, and it's really needed for one critical demographic, which is teachers. So we need to think of like how to produce them and how to kind of bring them to market and slowly build on it, because it's actually a key skill. India can do that. We have a lot of talent, engineering talent, and so startups and so on. But I don't see actually a lot of work on this aspect. So, the way this works actually in any other country is that the government would give like a lot of incentive. So initial funding, research funding, or even like financing for startups in the initial stages would be given by a type of a institutionalized framework. China did that, right? How did they get so good at R&D? So they were doing that for the last 20 years, and they give like institutional support, startups, financing, and also R&D. And we have to at some point start in India in this aspect. And yeah, so I will just stop here. But I think a critical point would be how we can actually build AI-driven games or apps. It could also be, non-digital. It could also be, uh, what do you say, books or board games. India invented board games. A lot of people don't know this, but a lot of board games were invented in India. Where are the current generation of intellectual games from India? Nobody's doing that. So we need to think of this and think of this in terms of a practical situation, how we can make it more and more popular. And it should also be like a badge of honor that I am able to speak my native language to that level of fluency. I have that level of vocabulary, and I am able to show this through a test. I got evaluated and I got this. And this should be a badge of honor for elite, for our engineers, for our doctors. And once we have a sufficient pool, then we will see a switch. Until then, we will not have so our languages would be like essentially kitchen languages, what sometimes say it's good only for the kitchen, and so within the family setting, but not in the professional setting. So I'll stop here.
Yeah, as we go ahead and Anurag, Chetan, and Kushik add their points, I would just like to say in Ameya's terminology that we don't need Indic languages to be not music, sorry, museum languages anymore. Museum languages anymore. Enough of that. Let's change from museum language to ecosystem language. And I think there is the larger question. I'll add my views also, but in the end means in the end of this portion. And then, of course, I have a lot of questions to deal, which Kiran, of course, will have to answer. And, of course, others can intervene. So I think, Anurag, I think you have not spoken for a while. You go ahead and then
It's all right. So just adding to what Kiran just said. So, for example, if you look at India and the edtech investment in India, so I have been tracking education technology investment in India, and you can see that more than 80% of investment has gone into prep market, preparing students for exams like IIT or NEET, all of that. And like Kiran was saying that how it is very crucial for us to invest in like teaching technologies, which has not happened at all. And for example, I think just 1 week ago or maybe 2 3 days ago, there was one story where how Korean government was promoting, encouraging Korean language, and now on, for example, we do not have something like Duolingo in Indian context. So Duolingo like has been created by Google, and if I want to learn Telugu or Tamil, we do not have such app in Indian context, like as efficient as Duolingo is, right? So I think even VC money, venture capitalist money in India, and India is one of the most like fastest growing edtech market in the world now after China cracked down on edtech companies. So our direction is completely different. We're going into completely different direction. Instead of investing in Indic languages in mother tongue or in curriculum and pedagogies in education, we are actually investing into like many companies which are in prep market domain. So I think we also need to rethink around some of these things. How can we can restructure them, reorganize them? Or government intervention is very much needed, like some kind of monitoring, some kind of guidelines to drive them to this kind of investment.
Chetan, you can add. Yeah.
Oh, I believe, yes, Ameya, Kiran, and Anurag have already covered much. I just like to add a sentence that, yes, catching up is already a hard job right now for NDA. And catching up through English will make it only harder, not easier.
Yes.
So that's all. And one last thing, and by going native, we should okay. We shouldn't. Going native and xenophobia. We shouldn't at least confuse them. Here's another encyclopedic dictionary of mathematics in Russian, and a lot of the references are in German and French and English. So although they studied articles in maybe all the book is in Russian, if someone wants to study further, they at least have to speak one of these three languages. So we can learn in our own language without being xenophobic. So that's all.
Great. Kushik, you can go ahead, brief, so that I can add some views and some follow-up questions, and then the last part. Yeah. Okay, so I consider Kushik, if you're speaking, you're on mute. If you can try to unmute yourself. Yeah. Okay. Okay, yeah, good. Okay, I think there's some problem with his own logistics. No problem with that. Maybe we can take his points afterwards. So sorry for that. So my view here is that I agree with the reflection which Amir has presented, and I think he talked about conversational AI. In fact, that is I would say, as I had used the word technocratization, I was referring to that example in the simple way. So what is generally we see is that whenever a knowledge economy policy is made as to how you should enrich your knowledge economy at the end of the day, wherever in the world, I think a larger question is should be there as to how it benefits the population. Now, I know certain examples of certain games which promote the Indian culture these days. Like, I'm trying to interview them. They are Nodding Heads came from Pune, who made the game Raji. I played the game, and I must say it's really interesting. Very very interesting VFX, very interesting graphics. I think I don't know. People are trying. There's one person from South India. I don't remember his name. He's also trying to make a game on Asura. So I think his name is Asura game. So he's also trying to do. So I think on a larger scale, the problem which will come in is that as the economic point of view comes in always, and that is the driver of a civilization, any empire, and that is the perpetuating driver. I think what is happening with companies across the globe, and I might be wrong as well, is that they might, and I'm talking about the big companies, I'm not talking about the startups, of course, I'm not naming anyone, but the biggies have a sense that due to the monopsonic situation, I'm using this word very carefully, monopsonic situation of English, they actually can't go ahead without nativity. So, as Anurag mentioned about Duolingo, ironically, due to Squid Game, people are learning Korean, reported by Reuters. So, if I'm wrong, sue the Reuters. I don't care. But I think if it is true, then it is true. So, yes, that's happening. People are learning Korean. That's very interesting. Ironically, I'm not going to give spoilers on Squid Game. Watch it yourself. Very, very good cultural tones. So, very good series, better than that series called Money Heist. So that's my spoiler. End of it. So my main point here was that I think learning is something, and adapting with it doesn't take time. It's something that when processes will come in, people will do it anyhow. Interest and incentives are related to it. I think therein what I see in a lack of India's policy, and I'm only talking about that right now, and of course follow-ups can be given, and then we can go to the final point, is that the problem is a lack of strategic realism, and why it is there not there is because even if a very good national education policy which came in last year, very excellent policy, I must say, I mean, from a perspective of education and so forth, the problem that will still come in. Okay, so I remember one thing, that for NCRT CBSE books, the government has actually partnered with some machine learning companies who develop natural language processing for regional languages. I know one company which was featured in an expo by Niti Aayog, which is I don't remember the name. I'll talk about it afterwards. But they actually translate between various languages like Hindi to Punjabi and so on. So they said that for any book which is in this particular standard, we can translate it for native readers. Now that's a very good way to do. It's a very good way of democratizing. But I think this is just using you're assuming that somebody who's a data subject here, because the consumers who are going to learn are the data subject here, they're going to be subjected to something, and then the technology is giving you the framework to do it. That's one angle to it. But I think the other angle which was raised by Amey also was about the basically skill in the industry. You know what, if you're not skilled enough, how will you contribute to the industry, how will you democratize? That comes to IP also. India's intellectual property course is not going good, and I think it has to work more on that. So therein I have a third point to add. That is what the exact intersection I wish to address was that translation is fine, all of that is good. How will we go ahead with attaining knowledge approaches which are connected with the way languages work? That is the larger point, and which, if accelerates fast, I think can help people a lot. And this is something which I'm conceiving. I might not be absolutely correct in what I'm trying to make in sentence, but I think you might get my point. And there, maybe I think the state's role might be there, but I think private actors must think about it, because the problem is that, and I might be wrong on this, I don't know. I do not see a larger cooperation of or collaboration or incentivization by companies also, not just government, companies also, to see beyond the Anglosphere when it comes to their, creative projects and initiatives. And this is something which I say, fine, okay, fine, you want to go to US and you can do that in collaboration, good. But what about Europe? What about maybe Africa, some countries, or Southeast Asia, or maybe other countries? So I think there it is also an issue which can arise, because again, this contributes to information economy that might contribute to your global supply chains and so forth in future, if you actually really upskill up and contribute to it. But that's actually, of course, a question of the future. So uh, now let's go on with uh, the questions which were asked by people to Wakibs on Twitter. I think let's do that. And in the middle, of course, before that, if anybody wishes to add something on what we have discussed on technology so far, I think we really need a second round of this discussion in future, maybe, because we discussed a lot about Indic languages to justify also in some way that, what, fine, these languages are needed and why we are needing them. But I wish to discuss more nuances, because so what we do in ISAIL, my organization, is that we classify AI in three types. Simply, that's a legal classification for law. We say that AI is a subject, AI is an object, AI is a third party. Third party classification means AI is completely autonomous and can be sued. That's not possible. We all know why. AI is not a human being. You can legally do it. But the one or two classification works. So it's manifest availability, which we are working on. And of course, we can discuss that in future, not now. So that's not something which we should do, because it's already 2 hours. So I think let's go ahead with the questions. But yeah, on this portion of technology, if people wish to add just a quick bit in 1 minute or less, please go ahead. So starting with Amey, starting with Pakibs, then Chetan, then Anurag, then Pushik. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess just to make it brief, yeah, again, I think that India needs to undergo a shift and think about technology in a different way. We need to focus on developing the problem-solving skills, how to reason about things, and really that can be done in whatever language is most comfortable to people, right? So I think we need a more inclusive development that is not just limited to the smaller than 10% of the population, but actually extends to the entire population. And yeah, and I think what Indic languages can do in this is to really usher in a democratization of knowledge. I think this is really what it is. So again, the example of China that I took, they're outputting, quite impressive research. This has been a transformation that you've seen ramp up over the last few years in a lot of AI and machine learning venues. One of the things that they do well is that they have democratized a lot of the knowledge, right? I think it was Andrew Ng, who's a professor at Stanford, who noted on Twitter or somewhere that nowadays with the use of AI technology, also they pretty much take all this new blog posts and new research tidbits that come out in the space of AI, and they immediately translate this to the Chinese language within 48 hours or so. So this is something that I think we can definitely do, if there's a will to do that, right? And I think once you have a knowledge ecosystem in Indic languages, that is a democratization of knowledge, and now you can leverage a larger pool of talent, a lot of people who have great abilities and creative thinking ability, but they just cannot get ahead because of the linguistic apartheid that we have excuse my use of the term, maybe. So I think this is really what we need to focus on. And I think it is just one last point, right? I think it's easy to say that, okay, this is something that really needs government intervention, and you need some kind of blessing from the central government. I think to some extent that is true, but also I think that leads to a mentality where it's easy to justify inaction and say, okay, we can't really do anything independently. And I think with, for instance, this mission at BHU, where they introduced Hindi, right, as an engineering medium. I think one of the difficulties is that people will say, okay, where are the resources in these languages? And it's kind of a bit of a chicken and egg problem, right? Where okay, we're not going to create the courses until there's a vibrant ecosystem in those languages. But then why do we create those resources if there's nobody to study it, right? So I think this is something where we can really, people like us could take the initiative, right? I mean, we have, if you have some expertise in a certain area, for instance, many of us here are in tech or law, I think that, let's start creating that ecosystem, writing in Indic languages. I think what Kiran is doing, for instance, trying to translate terminology and post scientific things in Telugu, I think that's a great sort of thing that we should continue. And also, I encourage people to reach out to me on Twitter if you're interested in this, because I think I have some ideas on this front.
Indeed. So I just thank you so much for sharing this. I just shared this Economic Times article. You can just look at it, and yep, that's it. So I think Kiran, we should start something. Then Chetan, then Kushik. Let's go ahead.
I just want to say that technology will not, solve our problem. We have to solve the problem, and technology is a tool for it. And a lot of people actually are very lazy. I would say, especially in the Indian tech scene, the big companies, they are just expecting at some point natural language processing would advance to such a level that they don't have to do any work, they don't have to move anything, and all the material would just automatically get translated to whichever Indian languages. So they're just looking at it as if production of spam text that nobody would bother to read. Essentially, it's really a very demeaning way of looking at Indian languages, and I have a serious problem with it. And so NLP is great, and translation tools are getting better and better. But what we really need to do is we need to translate. So as in technical people, culturally, sophisticated people, professionals, they need to work and translate. So I decided to do that in my field and also to some general purpose things. And I realized that actually it's a hard task. It's not easy. And secondly, the automatic translation tools are pathetic. They're okay for some languages, for French and German, it's okay. It's not that good, but it's better than trivial. For Indian languages, it's really bad. And also a lot of the times just keep the English word because they just don't know what to do with it. So essentially, this task will not be solved by technology. We need people with language skills and people who are actually linguists and who they need to work hand in hand with professionals. So we need tools and apps that can help build these things. And I think at some point, I totally agree with what Ameya said, language apartheid. I think it's totally justified. And what we have actually is a very, a way of looking at India where Indian languages don't exist in the outer sphere. They only exist in the kitchen or somewhere. And big companies, they just expect that it is fine if, for example, they don't have their websites in Indian languages. So I saw there were a lot of also the Indian tech as well. They don't even have their websites in Indian languages, or they don't publish in Indian languages. They don't even interact with their clients in Indian languages. So they just expect everything. So if you are not English speaking elite, the 5%, 10%, you don't exist. So this is how we look. If you go to an Indian airport, you cannot buy Indian books, right? It's a similar situation. So we need to have a change of how we look at things. So in German we call it Weltanschau. That has to be changed. So how we look at the world, and that needs to come by some kind of a cultural movement. The government has a huge responsibility to kind of kickstart these things and institutionalize these things, but they don't have a voting base why they have to do that, right? So this is why they don't care. We are, they say we are a democracy. We don't have to do it, and essentially it's a huge disadvantage for our future. We will have a serious problem in the next 5 to 10 years if you don't fix it right now. And I think enthusiasts and especially people who are at least partially motivated in this aspect, I highly recommend that they actually spend some time translating. So spend manual translation of whatever things. It doesn't matter technical things, but anything. Just reactivate the brain a little bit in your native languages. It's very easy. Once you do that for a few months, you will get the hang of it. And we need a core base of people who are actively using native languages. And there can be technology, social apps or technical apps that can support them. So that's I think I would just stop here. Yeah.
Sure. Chetan, would you like to add? Very minimal, and so does Kushik. Yeah.
I believe Kiran said what I wanted to say. Technology cannot solve all your problems. So ultimately, it has to be you. I'll just add an example. Recently, someone wanted to learn Tamil. And okay, forget about Tamil. Think of take Sanskrit. Look at most English Indian textbooks that teach Sanskrit, and in at least in the ones that I have seen, there is no methodology. You're just supposed to cram some random vocabulary, and then sentences. There are no explanations, and that system has to come from people. Technology again can be a tool. For instance, you can add probably you can publish MP3 files along with the textbook. That's how far technology can go. But ultimately, the course system, whether it's a language, whether it's mathematics or programming, it has to come from a person. Okay, that's all.
Yes, Kushik, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would probably add is about before going into technology about AI and automatic translations and things like that. I think we haven't achieved even information processing. I think that's one of the things that we were talking in private the other day about being able to consume information, process information in Indian languages, not just having to translate, but you should be able to input information in your mother tongue, some Indic languages, able to do something with the data as is actually. So it is this kind of thing that we need to
Okay, great. In case I'm not able to hear, I'm sorry, but I think we got the point. What he was trying to say. Of course, information processing is a big deal, and I think there also question of data quality, data localization, all of which will come up. It will cram up anyways. So let me begin with the questions, and I know that I have found the tweet where the questions have come in. Let me start with the questions posed by Amrita and of course other people one by one. And we would like to release also something. It's a bit late, so we'll do it afterwards. But yeah, that release will happen afterwards in a minute also. In a minute means the release will happen in a minute, but after this questionnaire being done. So let's do it fast. I'm sharing the screen. Kiran, you can have a look at it and I can read the questions for you. It's just 1 minute. So if you can see, this is the question by Amrita. So Amrita, hello, if you're watching this. The question is, I remember a thread of yours elaborating on the alternate Tolkienian world where all Indian languages had local etymologically rooted names. Can you please describe it again on video and perhaps speculate more on a fictional / alternate history India? And if you wish, I can read the second question for you as well, and then you want to answer it combined, or yeah.
I just would like to pass this question because you're running out of time, and I might just at some point do a video. But yeah, it's just about playing with the names of languages as we speak. Yeah. Please go on to the other questions. And I would like to say, for the interest of time, one of the panelists should just take the lead and answer the question because we cannot have a discussion on all the questions. So, yeah.
Right. So, would you like to deal with this? I know this is antithetical to the theme at hand, but any recommendations for peeps like me who will remain, who for whom English will remain psychologically and manifestly first language? Maybe this can be dealt in brief. I think so. If rest of the panelists wish to deal, yeah.
So yeah, I already said that we can all start from where we are, and we can slowly improve our fluency in our native languages or other Indic languages. And we need material. I would just recommend a lot everybody to read Indian language books. So if you cannot read Indian language script, that's a problem. But I guess online material can be translated or transliterated to Roman script. But you can all start reading, and then other activity where you speak in a context every day. We need to have a, not every day, but at least every week. If you are in a scenario where you can actually have a discussion in that language with a community or a small group of people, please do that. I just saw that are in a worse shape than in Indian languages. So, for example, Native American languages have mostly disappeared. There are very minor groups of people who are fluent in them, and they really struggle to create a context where they can use the language. So they have a meeting, let's say once a week or so. They try to speak and they try to show the vocabulary, how it can be spoken. And it's they're maintaining the language in some live way. It's very nice to do that. We are not in that pathetic situation, but we might get there, right? So we need to build context where we use our languages, and everybody can start where they are. And it's not that hard, I would say a few years is good enough to get to a level of fluency and proficiency in any language, depending on how motivated you are. So just I would encourage everybody to spend some time writing and spend a lot more time reading in native Indian languages. Maybe others can add on this topic.
Yeah,
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So I believe today I came across this word, probably Dik Suchak Ili Dit Suchak. That's the probably Hindi translation of compass. So if you, at least I didn't know the story, but when I read the etymology, that Brahma had about 8 or 10 daughters, and each daughter is again metaphorically a direction or a dik or dit, I believe. So then suddenly dit suchak makes more sense than compass. So if you again read about your own culture, your own history, then all these pedantic terms will sound more normal than borrowed words. That's all.
Great. Amey, wish to add? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the context in which this is asked is right. Basically, somebody has knowledge of his mother tongue and does use it in a certain context, right? But maybe psychologically, English has taken that role mainly because of the other context in which it arises, right? So I think a lot of it is just about sort of reactivating the neurons in your brain, right? I think there's a lot of knowledge there that just is dormant, and I personally found that trying to translate things or concepts or think about things in my language or other Indic languages, that actually helps a lot. And just trying to consume content, whether it be reading literature, even reading newspapers, I think that kind of thing can help. And personally, for me, I mean, just to give you some background, right? I mean, I came to the US when I was quite young, and my mother tongue is Konkani. And I actually learned Hindi as a 5th language. So, but I found I find that I'm like easily fluent in it, and I have no problems trying to translate things in my head. But I think the way I manage to do that is just by consuming a lot of content, and that's really how to do it, I would say.
Great. So okay, so I think we are we have to rush more, and we have to conclude fast. So I think let me do the honors. And since we are concluding IPMF 2021 next year, I don't know what discussions we'll have, but I think we really had a very good set of discussions. The first one I had with Richard on the Anglosphere. We have really chopped down and criticized the Anglosphere at our best. So watch that discussion at your peril and enjoy. Then we had on the Abraham Accords, and then we had just today with Karthikeya on Indian approach to refugee policy, and now we are just concluding this discussion on Indic languages. Now I consider that we need a second round for this, so we will have it in some time. I don't know when, but I think we will then more focus on technology instead of languages, because I think this discussion for viewers in future has made a very good stance as to why it is important at the end of the day. And the good part is it's like I would say it's just like a treasure where you've got everything. Now you get on the next part. So you have got the basics, now get on the next level. So I think the next level portion will be discussed further. Not now, it's already late. So let me do the honors as people will watch and painstakingly watch till this time being watched. I wish to release this, so let me do this and then we are done. So this is a very impressive report. Not impressive, but I would say people would say impressive. I developed this report with my team of GLA, which is on regulating AI ethics in the Indo-Pacific. Not getting into the details of it, but this report is actually about how Indo-Pacific matters and how we can have an approach even without Quad. We don't need to obsess around the Quad a lot, and we can still come up with an AI ethics approach to start with. It covers both concerns for companies, big ones, startups, and also governments, both in Asia and Africa, Eurasia and Africa, and also those who are interested in others. So, yeah, I think to conclude this, picture abhi baki hai, and we have to do a lot. So, with this, we end the 15th episode of In This Thing. We will be coming up with more episodes in a while, and till then, yes, happy belated Dussehra to everyone. Happy Vijay Dashmi belated to everyone. So sorry to say it late. And till then, take care. Namaste. And just a request to panelists: once this session ends, just 2 minutes. I need you after the live session for feedback, and then we are done. So thank you, everyone. Subscribe to International IGlobal Podcasts. Let us reach to 1,000 subscribers fast, and then of course we'll have more discussions further. Till then, the end. Namaste.